Okay, welcome. Today we're going to be talking about knitting Intarsia in the round, and we're going to be practicing with this argyle pattern. Now what I've done so far is I cast on 54 stitches provisionally onto a 16-inch circular needle, and since this is just a practice swatch, I'm using a size 6 needle, but you can use any size that you want with worsted weight or DK weight yarn. And I've gone ahead and knit a few rounds with my background color. And the other thing that I did is I wound some bobbins with enough yarn or some yarn to knit each section of color. So I've got in my chart here, I've got different sections of color. So at the beginning I'm going to be starting here and I'm going to be following this these 18 stitches. For right now, because I'm going to be working circularly, I'm going to be ignoring these purple diagonal lines. Those are going to be added later with duplicate stitch. So ignoring these purple sections, I'm going to be knitting one section of white or light color, so I'll need a bobbin for that. Then I'm going to have a section of this dark color and I'll need a bobbin for that. And then I'm going to have a section of white again, or the light color, and I'll need a bobbin for that. If I was, and I'm only going to do this chart once, but if I wanted to repeat this several times around, I would need, again, for each section of color, I would need a bobbin. So if I was repeating this 6 times, or twice, let's say, I would need 2 bobbins of this color, 2 bobbins of this color, 2 bobbins of this color. Or, since both of these are the same, 4 of this color and 2 of this color. Okay. Now in Intarsia generally is worked flat. It can be worked round in the round rather easily. It's just that you need to employ a couple of tricks from other knitting techniques to make it happen. And to knit an Intarsia pattern in the round, we're going to be using short rows to link our 2 sides of our fabric together, so that we don't end up with a big old gap between our sides. So in order to be able to know where to put our short rows, they're not technically short rows, but we are going to be wrapping and turning. And in order to be able to know where we should do our wraps and turns, we need to identify the very first stitch and the very last stitch of the round, which you can see by my tails that it's this one and this one. So I'm going to put a pin in that place, and then these I'll move up as I progress, but I just need to make sure that I always identify the first and last stitch of the round. Okay, now I've done that. I'm also going to be using a second set of pins to help me find the wrap. They're just something I borrowed from Japanese short rows. For me, sometimes it's difficult to see the wrap, especially if it's a dark color or the lighting's not good or whatever. Sometimes I can't see the wrap very easily, so I'll use a pin to identify that, and I'll show you what I mean by that when I get to that point. So I've cast on, as I said, 54 stitches just to get around, and I'm going to follow the chart. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to work 9 stitches plain, and I'm going to go ahead and join in my first bobbin of background color. So I'm going to wind off some yarn, and I'll go ahead and join in that one. And I'm going to just work 9 stitches Hmm. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And to keep myself straight, I'm actually going to take another couple of markers and stick them at the beginning and end of my repeat, the one I'm actually going to be working the, oh, these are too small. The one I'm actually going to be working the color pattern. Use these. Okay, so now I knit 9 stitches. Just count that again, 2, 4, 6, 8, 9. And now I'm going to start the pattern here, and I'm going to be knitting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 stitches of the background color. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And when I run out of yarn, I'll release a little more. Okay, now I'm going to join in the dark color. About Intarsia is you just want to manage your bobbins. Okay, and I am leaving a tail, which will get woven in later. Okay, so just go ahead and join in the next color. And then I'm going to do 9 stitches again of the background color. And this other section I have on another bobbin. So join in, and I'll work 9 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and I'll stick that other marker. Now these markers are just there for me because have a hard time keeping track of patterns because I get distracted. So that's just isolating the 18 stitches for the color pattern. And now I'm just going to work around in the background color all the way to the end of the round. And when I get to the end of the round, this is where we're going to turn around and go back. And I'm going to demonstrate a couple of different methods. One will be turning around and purling back, and then we'll do one by knitting backwards. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get all the way up to that last stitch. Okay, so I've knit all the way up to the end of the round, and see there's this gap here, right? So if I just turned around now without doing anything and purled back, which is what I'm going to do after I wrap this stitch, but if I didn't wrap this stitch, what would happen is this gap would continue on up in the fabric. So of course we don't want a gap. And this is just a simple wrap and turn as what you would do for short rows. And the trick to remembering what to do is always this: move the yarn, move the stitch, move the yarn, move the stitch. So that's the sequence. And I'm going to be wrapping this stitch here. So I'm going to move the yarn forward. I'm going to move the stitch. I'm going to move the yarn back, and then I'm going to move the stitch back. Okay, now that I've wrapped that stitch, I'm going to undo it so I can talk to you about or tell you what I meant, what I wanted to do with the pins. Well, actually, before I do that, let me just show you something. Okay, so when I come back later and I'm going to be looking for this wrap right here, but when everything's all pulled together nice and snug, sometimes it's challenging to see, at least for me, or to find it. So what I like to do before I start moving the yarn or anything like that is I'll take a pin and I'll stick it on the working yarn. Okay, and I'm going to move it with the yarn. So as I said before, we're going to move the yarn first, move the yarn, bring the pin, move the stitch, move the yarn, and move the stitch. Okay, that stitch is now wrapped. It's a little loose. Okay, but now that I've done that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn around like I normally would if I was just knitting anything, and I'm going to purl back. Now we are still working in the round, even though we're purling back. And what enables us to stay in the round is this wrap stitch, because it links this side of the fabric to this side of the fabric. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and purl back. And it's just regular purling. This is as complex and challenging as color pattern involving Intarsia and things like argyle. As challenging or as complex as they look, they're just knitting and purling. They are just knitting and purling and keeping yourself organized as far as where the yarn that you need for the particular section that you're in, where that yarn is, and manipulating the yarns at the color changes, which are not, that's not difficult either. It's just remembering how specifically to manipulate the yarn at the color change so that you don't end up with any gaps. And I'll talk about that in just a second, as soon as I get to the first color change, which I'm about there right now. And I left a really little tail. Don't leave a really little tail. This is too short. Leave them at least 4 to 6 inches, just so that you have, because one of the things about Intarsia patterns is you will have tails to weave in. And if they're too short, it'll be a challenge. Okay, so I'm going to drop this color now, and I'm going to work one stitch according to my pattern. Purling. Actually, I went around this way, now I'm purling back. So let me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let me back up. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Actually, I'm going one stitch before, just one actually, because on the back side I should be getting 3 blue. Well, you'll see 1, 2, 3. Okay, so the trick is when you're going to change colors, okay, now I want to switch to the blue, that you always pick up the new color you're going to work with, in this case the blue, from underneath the old color that you were just working with. So I was just working with this beige color, so now I'm going to pick up the blue color. And I'm just going to go ahead and purl that. So 1, 2, and this stitch is split. Let me fix it real quick. And 3. Let me pull on the tail there to snug things up. And so now I want to switch back to this gold color, and I'm going to pick up the other bobbin. Now, one of the things that happens too, let me pull these forward so you can see. See how these yarns are getting tangled around? So you will have to be moving your bobbins around to untangle them or rearrange them so that you're not all wrapped up. That's just what happens. So I'm changing back to this beige color again, and so I need to pick it up underneath the color that I was just working with. And once I've done that, I can just go ahead and continue knitting around or purling. Pulling back, and again I'm working towards the marked stitch. You can see them here. Okay, so here I am, and I'm going to go ahead and work the marked stitch. Here's the wrap stitch. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and, let me remove the pin. I'm going to go ahead and work the wrap stitch, the wrap, with its stitch, and you can take the wrap and pull it up on the needle, and then go ahead and, it's really loose because I didn't anchor those. Okay, but go ahead and put it up on the needle and then work them together. And now what we're going to do is we're going to wrap the next stitch before we turn around and knit back. So again, we're going to move the yarn, move the stitch, move the yarn, and move the stitch back. Then we'll turn around and knit back. Okay, so now that I went across this way, and then I came up and I came back this way. Now I'm going up to row 3 here, and I'm going to work back across here. And I can see here's my center stitch, and I should work to 1 stitch before the dark, and then I can switch colors. So I will go ahead and do that. It's loose there, but you can see how that's joined. Okay. You couldn't, I wasn't in frame. You could see how that's joined. Let me give myself a little bit more yarn. Okay, now I'm knitting back, and technically we are working flat back and forth, but that little deal with the wrap and turn allows us to link the beginning round and the end of the round, so that we are for all intents and purposes, still in a tube when we're done. Okay, so here I am, one stitch before the color work, one stitch before the color work. So now I need to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the blue. So I will drop the color I'm working with, and I will pick up from underneath. So here's the one I'm working with. Here's the one I want. So I will pick up from underneath, making sure that this is on top. So from underneath, and then I will work my, now I can take that strand and snug it up after. So I'm working 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then when you're in these areas, of course, you're going to be pulling these snug afterwards. When you pull in your ends. Okay, so now I'm going to switch colors again. So I will drop the dark blue and pick up the gold, the appropriate gold. Where is she? Right here. Up here, so it's this one. From underneath, this one stays on top, and then knit around those. The one's not real. Okay, so I've been moving along, and I knit several rows. So I've got quite a bit of the bottom of the first triangle going on, or the first diamond, I should say. And now I want to show you how to work this by knitting backwards instead of turning around to purl. So I'm at the beginning of the round here. At the beginning of the round, that distracting little pin. Okay, so here I am, and I'm just going to knit across. I'm on row 7. I'm on row 9. So let me get along there. And I changed markers because the other ones were totally annoying. So row 9, I've got to change color here. So I'm going to drop the yarn. I usually like to toss it off to my left and then pick up from underneath the next color. And then continue knitting with it. And once I've knit that first color, I pull on the contrasting color. Not hard, but you know, so I can snug it up a little bit. And Intarsia is not difficult at all, but when you're working it on the diagonal, as we are here, going in a diagonal line instead of straight up and down, it takes a little bit of practice to get the tension so that the stitches are even. Okay, and then one more. Hold my yarn tight, and I'm going to drop the blue. Untangle myself, get rid of that over there. Drop the blue, and then from underneath, I'm going to pick up, make sure that the next color is coming from underneath. And basically you're just twisting these two so that that one gets anchored in. And the next time I pick it up, it'll get wrapped. So this one's on top, this one's on top, and this one's underneath, and I pick it up. And then work to the end. And once I've gone a few stitches, I usually like to pull on that other color just to secure things. Now I don't pull hard, just a little tiny bit to snug things up. And before I get too far, I usually stop and weave in any like super loose stitches where I joined in my colors. I usually stop and weave those in because to my eyes they're a little distracting as I'm trying to progress upward. So I take a minute to secure those before I continue on. Okay, so I'm almost at the part where I'm going to be doing my wrap and turn. And in the previous section I showed you when you do your wrap and turn that you would turn around and purl back. But this time I'm going to do my wrap and turn, but I am not going to turn around to purl back. I'm going to knit backwards. Okay, so here I am. And then here's where I've marked the wrap. So this is my wrapped stitch. The wrap stitch is the last stitch in this row. So I'm going to take the pin and I'm going to pull the wrap up onto the needle and knit it together with that stitch. Okay, now I'm ready to wrap the next stitch. So again, we'll move the yarn. I'm going to stick this pin on the working yarn, and I'm going to hold on to it to keep it loose. Then I'm going to move the stitch, move the yarn, move the stitch. Okay, and again, I'm leaving it somewhat loose there. Now, instead of turning around and purling back, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my left needle and I'm going to stick it through the back leg of the stitch on the right needle. And for all intents and purposes, this looks like what your needles look like when you go to make a purl stitch, right? When you purl, you go into the stitch from behind, and your right needle ends up in front of your left needle tip. So it's the same position as when you're making a purl stitch. And here's the yarn, and I'm going to move it in the opposite direction that from what I normally do when I'm knitting. When I'm knitting, I'm normally moving from right to left and then over the needle. So in this case, I'm going from left to right over the needle. So I'm taking the yarn and I'm coming over and I'm wrapping over the back needle. And now I'm going to take my front needle, my right needle tip, and pull it over the left needle. So let me repeat that again. I'm going to go into the stitch on the right needle from front to back. I'm inserting the stitch from front to back. Then I'm bringing the yarn over here from left to right over the top of the back needle and then pulling that wrap through. Let me do that a few more times in slow motion. Going into the stitch. Let me reposition myself a little bit. Okay. Here's the stitch. Going into the stitch. Taking the yarn over the top. I'll move this out of the, some of these things out of the way. It'll be less distracting. Okay. Taking the needle back, the yarn over the top from right to left, and then the right needle slides over the top of the left needle, like when you're binding off. It kind of feels that way. Over the top and pull it over. And if you're knitting with the yarn in your right hand, it's the same thing, really. Let me get myself oriented here. So you're still going to go into the stitch, right? I'm going to bring the yarn over from left to right, and then hold the yarn down and bring it over. It's a little easier for me carrying the yarn in my left hand because that's how I normally do it, but you can do so if you normally carry the yarn in your right hand, it will feel comfortable after a couple of attempts. Let's do it again. Go into the stitch, hold it with my fingers, you can see where I'm putting the needle into the stitch, and then the left needle tip ends up behind the right needle tip. Bring the yarn over the top from left to right, and then slide your right needle over. Into the stitch, over the top, slide it under. And after a little bit, it becomes just as quick actually as how you, just as quick as knitting forwards. But it takes a little bit of patience to get your tension just right and your speed just right. And in my case, I ended up having the same preference for holding the yarn, tensioning the yarn, wrapping the yarn, which is to carry everything in my left hand, like this, and then manipulating the stitch that way. That it ended up being equally comfortable for me. You might find that if you knit with forward with the yarn in your right hand, you might find carrying the yarn in your left hand when you're coming backwards more comfortable, or vice versa. And the same being true if you knit continentally the way that I do. But I just find that it's very comfortable in my left hand, and after a little while it gets pretty easy to do. Now I'm getting up to the color change part, and you handle the color changes just the same way that you do when you're knitting forwards. Grabbing the new color you want to work with from underneath the old color, Let me untangle myself. So, and don't think that you're doing something wrong if you have to stop every couple of minutes to rearrange your yarns and give yourself more slack, and that's just part of this type of knitting. There's a lot of pausing to reorganize yourself because there is quite a bit of stuff going on. Okay, here I am at the color change part, and I have to knit this one with the blue. So I'm dropping this yarn and I'm picking up the blue from underneath. From underneath. So it's coming from underneath and the other one is floating on top. And I'm doing just the same thing. Let me back up. I'm doing just the same thing. Sticking my needle into the stitch. You can think of it, you know, if you're going in through the back like so, but you can once it's in there, you can, just to double check yourself, look at it and say, okay, yeah, it's in the purling position. And then continue on with blue. I just like to take a little tug on that. And up over the top, over the top, go into the stitch. And actually, if you absolutely detest making the purl stitch, I don't know why you would. It's no more arduous than making the knit stitch, but let's just say you really didn't like to purl for whatever reason, and you're working a relatively uncomplicated stitch pattern. Knitting backwards is easy way to avoid ever having to purl, but it's a useful technique regardless. And as I said, after a little bit of practice, it goes fairly quick. Actually, let me see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. I think I was supposed to start going back the other way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Yeah, that one there should have been. I need to start narrowing. Hold on just a sec. Let me go back up and let me unknit these. Because so if you find yourself that you made an error and you're in the color block and you need to tink back, actually, I don't know how I would call this. It's tinking, but I'm not going backwards, so but it's not knitting. So I'm undoing the stitches. I'm gonna have to come up with something for that. And do the knit backward stitches. Awful. But as you can see, it's pretty quick in any case. Alright, this is where I made my loop. I did the color change before I was supposed to. So I'm still working then with the gold. And one gold from the blue. Now I get to change. Maybe a good thing I caught that. Okay, so I'm going to pick up the blue from underneath and work across those stitches. So on the other side, I'm going to work until I've got until I have one last blue stitch, which then is going to get worked in the gold. And now I'm moving the diamond inwards instead of making it go out. Okay. I've got a few more to go. Okay, blue, and so here I want to switch back to the gold again. Okay, so I'll drop my blue. Look back here, here's the gold. Right here. So I want to make sure I pick it up from underneath the blue. So as before, the color I was working with is traveling on top of the color I'm going to start working with. And now I'll go into the blue, wrap with the gold. I like working backwards instead of turning around to purl because I can see the stitch pattern. I can see the design, and if I make a mistake, as I did in that case where I came too far, I'll be able to fix it right then and there instead of noticing it 2 rows after having knit 2 rows with the mistake in them. Not that unknitting or unpicking or anything like that in Intarsia is any more difficult than it is when you're doing just regular knitting, with just regular stockinette with no color work or anything like that. But it's just annoying, and I'd rather fix things as soon as I make the mistake rather than finding it down the road. That's really annoying. Okay, so here I am to my wrap stitch. So now this is on the back end, right? So I'm just going to stick my needle into the wrap. So I have it with my pin, and into the stitch, and then I'll take the pin out. And now you could see that the wrap and the stitch are separated by the needle. I'm just going to back out a little bit so that I can catch both. So now the wrap and the stitch are both on the needle. And I'll do the same thing as I've been doing. Wrap the back needle. Okay, and now I'm going to wrap the next stitch. There's my pins down here, right? They're identifying my first and last stitch of the round. So I'm going to do the same thing again. Move the yarn, stick the pin on it,
Okay, move the yarn, move the stitch, move the yarn, hold it down a little so it's not too tight, and then move the stitch. Now I'm ready to knit forward. So off I go, just regular knitting forward. And so it's just a lot. This is what it looks like where you're join here. Actually, I could have done a neater job, but for a practice piece, yeah. Neater job meaning that I could have hidden the wraps a little better. So regular knitting, and now I'm moving my color in. So here's my chart. I've moved in 1 stitch already, which tells me I need to move in 2 stitches now. So I'm on row 11. So I'm still with the gold. 1, 2, and now I'm ready to switch. And just as before, making sure that my color I was working with is riding on top of the new color that I'm going to start working with. So I'm going to pick it up from underneath. When I pick it up, I don't want it to be here we are. Just make sure that this one's coming up from the bottom. I don't want to pick them up like this with this one on this side. It needs to be coming up from underneath. And then just continue knitting along. Okay, so I'm going to continue working on this little piece, and when I'm ready to put in the contrasting accent diamonds, we'll be doing those with duplicate stitch. So I will come back in a separate video actually and show you that technique. Okay, keep practicing on your swatch until you feel comfortable with either turning around and purling back or knitting backwards. Don't be afraid to try it with the knitting backwards. It's so easy. In fact, I think it's easier than turning around and purling back, just because you can always see the design. If you make a mistake, you'll be able to catch it right away. And the yarns, the bobbins here, these guys, although they still wrap around each other and want to get tangled, it's a little more manageable than when you're turning the work to purl back. Okay, if you have any questions, email me or head on over to the student group on Facebook and post your questions there, and I'll try to answer you as best I can and as soon as I can. See you soon.